So first I'm going to ask Tom Trainer to unmute to give us an introduction.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tom Trainer, and I'm chair of the Sherborn Groundwater Protection Committee. We are excited to be your sponsor this evening for this event. Tonight, we're going to hear about septics. Everyone in town, 100% of us, have these delightful devices in our front yards or backyards, and it's critical that we maintain them. Earlier this year, and what I'm showing on this slide, actually last January, we also had the advantage of this nice team from RCAP give us a training session on our private wells. And it turns out one of our biggest risks to our private wells is our private wastewater system. So we thought it very important for this year to bring this event. For last year's event at the town website, if you missed it, you can download the slides, the Q&A text document, or rewatch the video. And I encourage you to do that if you didn't attend last year's event. And the same for tonight. Everything will be up on our website soon after the conclusion. I'd really like to thank our presenters, Rebecca, Andrew, and Jim from RCAP, and also let you know that the septic regulations, the Title V regulations do vary by town. And of course, RCAP covers a wide range of Massachusetts. And we are lucky we have and will have on our Q&A panel at the end of the session both our Board of Health agent, Mark Oram, and one of our experienced Board of Health members, Daryl Beardsley, to help answer your many questions that you're going to post in the chat. So with that, I will turn things back to Rebecca, and thanks everyone for attending.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, so today's presenters, the voice you're hearing right now is me, Rebecca Novak. I am a community specialist, and you will hear next from Andrew Evans, who's also a community specialist. We also call ourselves TAPs, or Technical Assistance Providers. We are both work for RCAP Solutions. And what is RCAP Solutions, you may ask? Well, it's a nonprofit nationwide company called RCAP, RCAP. That stands for Rural Community Assistance Partnership. And RCAP has 7 regions throughout the country. And we, right here in Massachusetts, are located in the RCAP Solutions Network, or the purple states on the map. RCAP focuses on providing training and technical assistance to rural communities on utility financing, management, and general administration related to drinking water and wastewater treatment. We do a lot more than that, but that's the short version of it. So this map that you see of New England, or a little bit more, has got a dot for every project that we did during last year's funding year. And the different colors represents different funders, but you get kind of an idea of all of our projects and the impact that we have to our region. We're doing a lot of work sprinkled throughout this region. Since this training has been funded by the US EPA, we must mention that the contents of the session do not necessarily reflect the views of the EPA, nor do they endorse trade names or commercial products that might be mentioned in the session. We're going to start out with a pretest. Don't get too worried. If you don't know the answers, that's totally fine. In fact, we like it when you don't know the answers, because we're going to go over the answers during the session. We're going to give you the same exact post-test at the end, and we would love to see how we did with delivering the material. And our aim is to make sure we see some improvement in these test scores. So I'll give you guys a couple of minutes. I'll be able to monitor how many people have answered. So like I said, do your best. I have had some complaints that when they launched the test of the polls, that the text is very small. I don't know how to fix this. I think this is a individual computer issue. It might be how zoomed in or out your screen is, but I'm very sorry if it's really too small to read, or if it's teeny tiny. You should be able to read it.
If you don't see it at all, sometimes it's just a matter of expanding the window. It will cancel it out entirely if your window is too small. So make sure the window is sized up.
The quirks of these online programs. Oop, I think it ended.
I did
Andrew, was
not
that
do
you?
that. I don't know why it stopped. I don't know what to say, Rebecca.
Nope, that's okay.
Just
That's
I didn't do it.
I'll just
yeah.
stop and close there. I suppose we're sorry, folks, if you didn't get a chance to finish up.
You will have another chance at the end, so
Mhm.
yeah. And for any of the other organizers that may have been in here, yeah, it's possible that one of the other people could have accidentally hit it. So in the post test, just make sure we don't click in any buttons. But that's okay. That'll keep us on time today, so we aren't here very late. So let's jump into our first poll question. I just like to get to know where we're at with understanding our septic systems. Do you know where your septic system is located? The answers are yes, no, I don't know, but someone else in my household does. I only know where some components are. A lot of people know where their septic tank, but not the leach field, or vice versa. But we also have people might not apply to them.
Rebecca, you'd like to end share these results on the polls?
Yeah, and I can see the results, or can I?
Okay. Whenever
I'll
you're
try
ready,
it.
I'll share.
Yeah. I can see it. Cool. So I see that most of you, 82%, said yes, I do know where it is. 14% said I know where some components are, and 4 does not apply. So, okay, great. So most of you know where your septic system is located. Next question. It'll be the last poll, I promise. Do you know the condition of your septic system? Is it in good condition? Bad? Is it failing? I can't think of any other examples of what you know about it, but and again, I think that's good. 78% of you know the condition of your septic system. 20% don't, and that's okay because sometimes you just don't know, or you're new to the house, or you haven't had any problems. So if it's not broke, don't fix it. Kind of, I don't know, haven't had any issues. Hopefully, we'll shed some light on possibly knowing the condition of your system by what you might learn today. So I'm going to start with some technical stuff. But before I get there, we're here to talk about septic systems. Okay, so let's just get into the basic step-by-step manner so we're understanding what a septic system is. First, wastewater is produced in the home, and it comes from sinks, showers, the laundry, dishwasher, toilets, and all this wastewater is going to go into a septic tank where it's settled. It's going to be partially treated there. That's going to flow out of the septic tank into a distribution box where the wastewater is evenly distributed into each of the pipes in your leach field. And then the wastewater is further treated under your leach field in the soil and safely discharging it into the soil, and then it's going to make its way into your groundwater. And the goal of this training is to give homeowners a better understanding of how the treatment process works within a septic systems. And you might be having a failing system or a new system, it's not built yet, and you might want to know why engineers have included certain design considerations, why newer technologies might be needed, and even how to operate and maintain your own septic system. And that's the big section here, and that's at the end. So first, let's talk about wastewater. So wastewater is what we put down the drain. It is what we flush and what ends up in our septic tank. And we have some terms that we always talk about. It gets a little more technical. We're going to stay with the basic ones: temperature, pH, organic and inorganic, solids, and biomass. So let's start with the first. Before that, we often hear the word gray water. And I just want to mention this term. We're not going to be talking about it again, but it does get confused and it gets thrown in the mix. Gray water is anything that we don't flush down a toilet. It's the water from the sinks, your showers, washing machine, dishwashers. So it's going to have a little bit of food, grease, hair, cleaning products, but no human waste. Okay, it does not come in contact with human feces. So that's where, if we're not going to be talking about it today, I just want to distinguish what gray water is and get that out of the way. Okay, temperature. So I like to fish. I have a lot of rivers near me, and I know that I get less bites when the temperature gets really cold because the fish are less active. I mean, generally. Bacteria are the same way. Bacterial activity is going to increase as the temperature increases. So since our septic systems rely almost exclusively on bacteria to treat the waste, increased bacterial activity means the system is treating more waste more efficiently in warmer temperatures. And this is just like a general rule of thumb. pH refers to how acidic or basic a solution is. pH values range from 0 to 14, where 7 is neutral. And values under 7, so 0 to 7, are acidic. So I'm not going to go into any more details, but all these products that are listed right here, they're found in all your residential homes. And the excessive use of anything on either end, meaning not milk or hand soap, but on the ends, bleach and a lot of cleaning solutions could disrupt the pH scale of what's going on in your system. Normal residential pH is going to be just fine, not going to have too much fluctuations, and it's going to be perfect for the bugs to live. But dumping too much of any of this on either end into your system could potentially kill the bacteria that are treating the waste. So there are both organic and inorganic solids in your septic system. Organic solids contain carbon. And those organic solids are decomposed by bacteria that utilize oxygen for energy. So they live in oxygen-rich environments. These bacteria are continually decomposing the molecules all the molecules of the waste until they eventually break it down into carbon dioxide and water. That's the end results. And those are harmless natural substances. Inorganic compounds, or inorganic solids, they do not contain carbon. So they're unable to be broken down by that bacteria that love the oxygen and that do a lot of the work. Some of the inorganic solids are going to be dissolved in your wastewater and carried out into the leach field and into the soil. The rest are going to be settled in your septic tank and are going to be stored there until the tank is pumped out. Examples of inorganic solids are sand, silt, some forms of phosphorus that can come from soaps, and some forms of nitrogen that come from our bodies. Sometimes we will talk about TSS or solids, or TSS is total suspended solids. And the name implies the exact nature. They are solids, they're not dissolving, and they're suspended in the water because they don't have enough weight to sink. So these suspended solids, they can be both organic and inorganic. So suspended solids means they are not sinking. They're not going to settle out in your septic tank. So they're going to be carried out into your leach field, into the soil. And if too many of these suspended solids pass through the septic tank, your leach field can become clogged and can fail. So there's effluent filters can be installed in the septic tank where your water is running out of the septic tank, and it can catch a lot of those solids and reduce the amount of TSS going into the leach field. Andrew's going to be talking about that filters later, so we'll go back to that subject. The organic components in wastewater with carbon is what is the food for the bacteria. Okay, and that bacteria is, remember, what the oxygen-loving bacteria. And up to 95% of the waste is going to be converted into the smaller molecules, that carbon dioxide and water. So the term high strength waste, we talk about the strength of waste a lot, means there's a lot of organics in it. There's a lot of food. And if there's a lot of food, we're going to in turn need a lot of bacteria to eat up the food or eat up the wastewater. So we need to protect the bacteria in our system so it can treat the wastewater, so it can eat its food. Biomat. This is a term may or may not have heard. It may have been used in a negative connotation. I'm not really sure. Everyone kind of talks about it differently, but a biomat is a slimy feature that forms when wastewater is dispersed onto the surfaces of soil or sand or any of the media that are used in wastewater systems and septic systems. And it appears as a dark brown slimy film. And it can turn into black when it's unhealthy and it has kind of too many bugs that don't like oxygen, not enough oxygen, too much food, too much organic carbon-containing wastewater. So it's this slimy film. The film is actually secreted by a bacteria. And it's another type of bacteria. It's a bacteria that do not like to be in oxygen. They kind of hate oxygen. They anchor themselves to the media, and then they form this like slime gelatinous protective coat to protect over them so that the oxygen can't get to them. And then they live in that oxygen depleted environment, and they, again, they're the bacteria, they're eating up not carbon, but they're eating up all like the rest of this wastewater food that we have. And they both types of bacteria, the kind that love oxygen and the kind that hate oxygen, they actually both play an important role in treating wastewater that flows by them. So we need to make sure that the biomat establishes a healthy layer and a healthy ratio of both the oxygen loving and the oxygen hating bacteria. Usually there's no need, normal wastewater, normal residential waste, and normal septic systems just automatically have all the good ratio of everything that's needed to just treat wastewater, but occasionally it can kind of get out of whack. Here's a simplified cross-section of a leach-filled trench. The wastewater leaches out of the pipe into the surrounding stone where the water is aerated, and then when it reaches the native soil, that's where it forms that biomat. Okay, off to Andrew to talk about nutrients. And you're taking the presentation yourself, correct, Andrew?
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping for.
Okay. And
I think I've got it now.
good, thank you.
Thanks for that section on biology, Rebecca. We'll now go into our next subject, a brief review of nutrients that are found in wastewater. First, we'll go over nitrogen. Most nitrogen that humans produce is in the form of organic nitrogen. This organic nitrogen is converted to inorganic nitrogen and ammonia by bacteria in the septic tank. The goal is to remove the inorganic nitrogen, as we said, from the wastewater using this healthy bacteria. Too much nitrate or ammonia in drinking water wells can cause serious health effects, as was mentioned before as well. Looking at how nitrogen is categorized might be best understood with a visual aid. All the nitrogen in the wastewater is called total nitrogen. It is split into two categories, particulate nitrogen and dissolved nitrogen. In a well-functioning system, the particulate nitrogen will be settled out in the septic tank and pumped out later. The dissolved nitrogen goes through a conversion process and then is carried out to the leach field where it can be broken down further and released as nitrogen gas. That zooglobal mass that, or the biomat, that Rebecca mentioned helps in that process. There are three different forms of nitrogen: nitrate, nitrite, and nitrogen gas. It occurs naturally, but sources of excess nitrate include fertilizers, on-site sewage systems, wastewater treatment plants, animal waste, industrial waste, food processing. High levels of nitrate in water can pose a potential health risk, especially to infants. Their digestion does not excrete the nitrogen, and the oxygen does not carry through the body to vital tissues. This is called blueberry baby syndrome, as the layman's term. There's a medical term as well, as listed below, which I don't want to even pronounce tonight. I'll be honest. Um, we have ammonia as well. It's a form of nitrogen. Ammonia, or a combination of nitrogen, is created by the degradation of naturally occurring organic matter and can be found in groundwater. Ammonia also comes from nitrogen fertilizer application, livestock operations, industrial processes, and sewage infiltration. The presence of ammonia at higher than normal naturally occurring levels is also an important indicator of something that could be going wrong, or fecal pollution. Um, High levels of ammonia are poisonous to humans and can cause upsets in the natural equilibrium of the ecosystem in nearby receiving waters in particular. So an incomplete process in the tank causing ammonia to leach out into the groundwater can also really cause a lot of potential health risks. In the previous slides, we talked about the categories of nitrogen in wastewater. Hopefully another visual aid can help. This wastewater nitrogen cycle happens in two processes. We have nitrification and denitrification. Nitrification in the presence of ammonia and aerobic bacteria convert to nitrite. Nitrite in the presence of aerobic bacteria is then converted to nitrate. Denitrification is the process where nitrate in the presence of anaerobic bacteria, which is then converted to nitrogen gas that is released to the atmosphere. The most important thing to remember is that a complete cycle requires different environments to convert the different forms of nitrogen, and these environments take place in separate areas of the system. Nitrification uses aerobic bacteria, denitrification uses anaerobic bacteria. Also, take note that a carbon source is needed for denitrification to occur. And what's the best source of carbon that we have on hand? Well, of course, it's raw wastewater with all that bacteria. So while you do not want to overload your system, you do need to keep the system fed to keep the cycle working properly. Another nutrient worth mentioning here today is phosphorus. Phosphorus is another nutrient found naturally in the environment as well as wastewater. Phosphorus is also essential to all living things. It comes from bodily waste, food waste, and is also found in some household detergents. So it is found in all wastewater. Some phosphorus is in solid or particulate form, so just like particulate nitrogen, it will settle in the tank and would be hauled away. The remainder is treated in the soil surrounding the leach field by bacteria or other chemical reactions, and then is used by plant as food or flows down into the groundwater. A certain amount of phosphorus is a good thing to have in the wastewater and in groundwater, as it is necessary for all life, but too much can cause issues. Specific types of plant life get too much of this nutrient, say in nearby waters, for example. They can grow at alarming rates. Because of the sheer volume of these plants, they can use up all the dissolved oxygen in the water, causing organisms that rely on the oxygen to die. In addition, some of these plants can also release toxins. The toxic release can also kill fish and other organisms in the water as well. Now that we've learned a little bit about nutrients, we can talk about bacteria, coliforms, and pathogens. We talked about anaerobic and aerobic conditions found in the septic system. Let's take a minute to talk more about that so we can better understand the process, as it is crucial to how these systems break down waste. Very broadly and basically, there are three different types of bacteria. The aerobic bacteria use dissolved oxygen for food, so they require free oxygen for survival. We have anaerobic bacteria that break down waste, again, in the absence of oxygen. And then we have facultative bacteria, and they don't worry about either environment. They're happy in either one. But remember, just each type of bacteria needs a specific type of environment to be fed and reproduce. Coliforms. There are three groups of coliform bacteria that we are concerned with. We have total coliform, fecal coliform, and E. coli. Coliform bacteria is a large group of bacteria that are found in the environment. Most importantly, certain types of coliform bacteria are found in the intestinal tract of warm-blooded animals, and of course in their waste byproducts too. These types of bacteria are a cause for public health and can be a threat. Total coliforms are an indicator organism, so their presence in water sample indicates a contamination of some sort and could mean that the sample contains harmful pathogens. So if coliform is present, you'll then want to conduct a follow-up test for more specific bacteria. The lab you are using should be able to test for E. coli if total coliform is present. They should also inform you, the client, immediately. Just remember, the lab should also be certified by the state you're in so you can rely on the results. It's very important. Pathogens. Pathogens are microorganisms that cause disease to its host. Most pathogens should be removed in a well-functioning septic system and the soil beneath it, keeping humans from getting into contact with it. Pathogens in a well-functioning system are digested by bacteria, which inactivates them. It's always good to lean on materials created by state or federal agencies. Mass DEP has private well guidelines. The document recommends sampling existing wells each spring for total coliform bacteria and nitrates. There's a lot of information on wells and well testing out there. Using reputable sources like Mass DEP or EPA is very important. And I'll let you do the presenting here on soils, Rebecca, but I'll flash the slides along when you're ready.
Okay, good, thank you. Okay, so a soil evaluator or another certified professional is going to be the one that is the hired expert for a new or replacement system. So we need to understand the soils and the high groundwater table to know if a septic system can be installed in a location. Before a septic system is installed, soil evaluation must be done, which include test pits and performing percolation tests or perk tests. And the information from these tests are going to be used for the siting and the design of your septic system. So it can't be done by any Joe. Soil evaluation at the exact site is important because the soil characteristics can vary over a small geographic area. So like, let's pretend this diagram shows your property, which is a single property. The hill on the left only has a shallow layer of usable soil with an impermeable bedrock just underneath, so that's not great. And the valley is a swamp, so it's half underwater, so that's not great. But the hill on the right has a nice thick layer of soils and and trees, and is gonna actually drain. So if you dig 3 deep test pit holes, you could get 3 completely different soil profiles on this one property or on your one property. Soil is composed of, next slide. You're ahead. Am I okay? A little delay here. Soil is composed of various percentages of sand, silt, and clay, and the amount of each affects the color, texture, and other characteristics like the rate that the wastewater percolates through the soil. It's also used to note. It's also useful to note that the structure of the sand, silt, or clay make when they're stacked on top of each other. And there's, as you know, it's not usually just sand, silt, or clay. It can be a combination. But you can see on the right how much easier water can travel by gravity through just sand, because it has many voids in between it. And it doesn't really travel very well through clay because of that blocky structure, and they're very close together. Soils are composed of different layers. So on the left, you're going to see what's called horizons. And these layers are determined by the deep hole test pit or an observation hole done by your soil evaluator, and it's just pretty much a neat vertical hole that's dug in the soil so your soil evaluator can classify and record all the information about all of the layers. And then you can see the difference on the top right hand side of the relative sizes of sand versus clay. And finally, the percolation test or the perk test must be done by, again, someone with approved qualifications like a soil evaluator, and this is a field test to assess the suitability of soils for your septic system or for your leach field. The perk test location is going to be determined by that professional, by the soil evaluator. The hole is dug, it's then filled with water, and the time it takes for the water to drop a certain amount is then used for design calculations by your designer. And that's all there is soils. Back to Andrew.
Thanks, Rebecca. Now that we know about wastewater and how bacteria use the wastewater, as well as nutrients and how the soil plays a role, let's get into what decentralized septic systems really are. It's worth mentioning that there are always exceptions, and these are just generalizations. So this may not be specific to your system that you have at your own house. Just a few terms. Soil absorption system is an SAS. Basically, it's the same thing as a leach field, disposal field. They're all synonymous, okay? If you hear me say one or the other, don't be alarmed. They are all the same thing. We already talked about gray water, so I won't mention that again. But you will want to know effluent. Effluent is the partially treated wastewater that will be going back into the groundwater. Okay, so that is one that you'll definitely want to understand. Okay, again, it's just partially treated wastewater cleaned up on its way to the soil. Okay, a cluster system is what most people think of when they hear the words decentralized septic system. A decentralized wastewater treatment system is typically under some form of common ownership and collects wastewater from two or more dwellings or buildings and conveys it to a treatment and disposal system located on a suitable site nearby. It is common to find cluster systems in places like rural subdivisions. The final disposal field will vary from one system to the next, but the main point here is that the wastewater is collected and sent to a shared drain field. As you can see, there are options. You may have individual septic tanks, or you may have shared septic tanks. Another thing worth mentioning is the grinder pump. These pumps are typically located in the basement or in a dry well just outside the home. These are used to pump raw wastewater up to the septic tank at a higher elevation. They're most commonly utilized if gravity cannot be used as a conveyance from the house to the septic tank. Now, I'd like you all to envision yourselves inside a droplet of water coming from a home. The first stop on your journey is in that little droplet will be the septic tank. A septic tank is a buried, watertight tank, usually made of concrete, fiberglass, or polyethylene. Septic tank is constructed to receive and partially treat raw domestic wastewater. Heavy solids, again, will settle to the bottom of the tank, while grease and lighter solids will float to the top. The solids stay in the tank while the effluent is discharged to the drain field for further treatment and disposal. Septic tanks typically have a 24 to 48 hour detention time. This means that it will take about 2 days for you and that droplet of water to get through the tank. Ideally, septic tanks are baffled with 2 access holes on the top. They will have an inlet and outlet pipe set at the right elevation relative to each other. The reason for the 2 compartments is to try and keep the sludge and scum inside the tank out of the leach field. It's very important. The scum floats to the top, and the sludge, again, settles to the bottom, so the cleanest water in that middle horizon or middle elevation there will go through the opening that lets water into the second compartment and out. Now, there are going to be T's that are fitted. The T's allow the wastewater to enter the septic tank below the surface so that it does not agitate the upper scum layer and pass through to the second zone. The outlet T allows water from the middle zone and the second area there to leave the septic tank. It is recommended to use an effluent filter at this location so that any remaining large particles can be filtered out, keeping the leach field even more protected. It's something you're going to want to clean, but we'll talk about that at greater length later. Before moving forward, I also want to mention a couple other tanks that are often confused with septic tanks. These are cesspools and tight tanks. A cesspool is not made to hold wastewater. It is not watertight. Instead of an outlet, the wastewater slowly drains through perforations in the wall of the tank. A tight tank is simply a buried watertight tank with an inlet and no outlet. Since the tank is watertight, everything that goes in will need to be pumped out later. and usually at quite frequent intervals, depending on how much wastewater is generated and how big the tank is. If you have one of these, adding an alarm is also a good idea to tell when the tank is over full. It's worth noting you will need to access this frequently for pumping and inspecting of the water level. If it is not pumped, the untreated wastewater will eat away at the soil and the tank itself, potentially causing sinkholes and causing odors as well. Not something you want. Moving along, if you're in that water droplet, we're about to enter another zone after the septic tank. It'll be a pump or pressure system, perhaps. Pump chambers are often for systems that cannot flow by gravity to the leach field or need intermittent pumping, say in an innovative alternative design, but we'll talk more about that later. As you can see here, there's a lot going on. Most importantly, you'll want to know that the pump chamber is powered by electricity, so you will need backup power or additional emergency storage when water is still being used during extended power outages. The chamber will have sensors and floats that will tell the pump when to turn on and off, and also an alarm that will tell you if the water level is too high. If that water droplet that we are in happens to be in a gravity system, we won't need to deal with the pump chamber necessarily, but we will go next into what's called the distribution box, or the D box for short. It's a box with 2 or more effluent pipes coming out of it. These pipes must be perfectly level to ensure the flow is evenly distributed to each section of the drain field. It's always nice to see these things in real life. Often they're buried, so I'll try to give you some examples here. As you can see, there may be different configurations depending on the circumstance. If the drain field is suspicious of being clogged or flooded, looking at the distribution box can tell us a lot. We can see if there is standing water in the effluent pipe, which there shouldn't be. It can tell us the history of the highest groundwater level. There could be a line that's there you can decipher. So all good things that you can learn from your distribution box, for sure. Now that we've learned about some of the individual components, now let's take a look at, now that we've learned about the individual components, let's take a look at the whole system together. Conventional septic systems are gravity fed and have a septic tank, then distribution box that goes to a drain field. They require deep, usable soil, but may not be easily installed on steep slopes. In conventional systems, effluent is piped from the septic tank to a shallow underground trench of stone or gravel. A geofabric type of material is then placed on top of the trench so sand and dirt and other contaminants do not enter the clean stone from above. The wastewater effluent filters through the stone, then to the soil below. Typical residential use is about 75 to 100 gallons per day, but for design purposes, we typically use 110 gallons per day per bedroom. Now we'll review typical types of leach fields that are found. First are trenches. Trenches are narrow stone-lined ditches with perforated pipes in them. They're surrounded by stone, wrapped in geofabric to prevent backfill from migrating. It's pretty standard design here. These are trenches in the field. You can see that they're very distinct. They're often long and narrow and do not disturb the surrounding soil. Now on to beds. A bed is a single footprint that contains multiple lines of piping. Beds are typically used where more permeable soils are present. Beds need a large surface area though. So let's take a look at an example of those. As you can see, we got a big excavator there in the background to give you an idea how big that is. And again, there's probably a 6-foot man in that area there, which is obviously a larger impact zone than your trench that we just talked about. Chambers, also called gravelless drain fields, have been widely used for a few decades now in many states and have become conventional technology. They take many forms, including open bottom chambers, fabric wrapped pipes, synthetic materials such as expanded polystyrene media. The gravelless systems can be manufactured with recycled materials and offer a significant cost savings and reduced carbon footprint. The primary advantage of a chamber system is increased ease of delivery and construction. They are well suited to areas that have high groundwater tables as well. Here are chambers installed in the field. They can be installed easily by cutting channels in the earth for each bed or a large area excavated for several chambers. This depends largely on the soils available. Would like to point out this green pipe there on the left picture. It's called a manifold, and much like the D-box, you're going to want to make sure that's perfectly level or very close to it so that all those chambers get the appropriate amount of flow. Here's a drip distribution system. Because of the additional need for pump station, perhaps, or a dosing tank, the need for electrical power, these systems require an added expense and increased maintenance. So they should be inspected at least once a year, not twice, by the manufacturer or contractor. Again, we like to show these examples in the field. You can see how shallow that is, but it can fit in fairly random areas, and it doesn't have to be perfectly level. So there are benefits. Mound systems are options in areas where there's shallow soil depth or high groundwater. The construction of sand mound contains a drain field within it. Effluent from the septic tank flows to a pump chamber where it is pumped to the mound at prescribed doses typically. Treatment of the effluent occurs as it's discharged through the trench and filters into the sand, then disperses to the native soil. While mound systems can be a good solution for certain soil conditions, they require a substantial amount of space and can be an eyesore. They also require haul material, and of course there's the pump station to consider as well. Again, mounds in the field. You can see they're elevated portions of earth here with a few structures poking out of it. These include inspection ports, vents, and pump chambers. They should be mowed, good buffering areas around them. The trees we see here are planted far away from the mound itself. That's really important. You don't want roots getting in there. These systems can, of course, become overloaded. This can mean one of two things. It could be organically overloaded, which is just too much food basically washing out of the septic tank typically. Or there could also be hydraulic overloading, which really is just a matter of far too much water coming into the system, whether that's leaky toilets or groundwater, that sort of thing. Briefly, I'd like to talk about composting toilets. This isn't your old school outhouse. As you can see in the schematic here, composting toilets use little to no water at all and use aerobic decomposition assisted by carbon source, such as sawdust or straw, to break down waste. Some have fans or a heater, depending on the climate. The solids will need to be removed at a regular interval because they will build up, and the tank should absolutely be watertight as well. Now, a little bit about IA systems, or innovative alternative systems. They're generally chosen because of site constraints, including proximity to environmentally sensitive areas, such as a body of water or drinking water supply. There may be less than ideal soil conditions, limited space available, depth of groundwater challenges, steep topography, intermittent use or seasonal use, or enhanced treatment requirements locally. IA systems are typically approved by each state, so make sure you check your authority to see what's been approved. IA systems add another step before sending effluent to the SAS in order to provide enhanced treatment. Enhanced treatment will deliver high-quality effluent, typically to reduce nitrogen, protecting the surrounding environment. Utilizing IA systems may allow the SAS to be downsized or allow less vertical separation between the bottom of the SAS and the high groundwater table, which could save on the amount of fill or sand required. IA systems do add components such as the control panel, the pumps, level sensors, timers, and so on, as discussed before. But here's probably the most important part. I'm glad we have a little bit of time here to talk about it. Operation, maintenance, and proper usage. This is the stuff that will keep your system operating long into the future. I hope. So let's just dive right in, figuratively, of course. We wouldn't want to do so literally. That could be problematic. But I do want to point out these guys out there, the septic haulers, they usually have a great sense of humor and they work really hard for the community they serve. A septic tank should be pumped regularly. It can be sludge judged annually to save money. The tank should be pumped when the depth of the sludge in the scum layer is about 50-50. So you want to make sure that you don't have too many solids or too many solids at the top or bottom of the tank. You also want to take a look at your effluent filter, clean that on an annual basis. And we also want to mention additives. Additives are not necessarily and may even be harmful. They are not needed for startup, nor do they reduce pumping frequency as often advertised. Pump chambers should be checked and cleaned if you have them. The floats, pumps, alarm screens, and filters should be checked annually, preferably by an electrician. The condition of the components should be noted. These things can be dangerous, so make sure you hire a professional. You're going to want to keep the grounds above and around your leach field grass covered and have at least a 10-foot buffer or perimeter around the drain field, free of trees or large brush that could have roots getting into the system. You want to spread out your major water usage, such as laundry and showers. Do not cover your leach field or drive on it. Covering by meaning like lots of shrubs or snow or a canopy carport, those sorts of things. Inspection ports may also be installed to observe the liquid level in your drain field. A high level may mean it's clogged, or that different laterals could be dry while others are full, indicating a problem. It can also have color or smell, indicating a performance issue as well. Here are some examples where system owners were not mindful of maintaining a buffer around their leach field. The image on the left there shows brush that was growing and needed to be removed. By looking at all those stumps, they are looking at a full replacement. That's quite costly. The center picture shows the same thing, but these plants are still in place and living quite well by the looks of it. It won't be long before this mound will need to be replaced as well. The bushes in the center picture also show that access is being blocked to vital equipment. As you can see, there's a consequence there as well. The picture on the right demonstrates really well the impact that roots can have on the pipes in your leach field. Not only are the roots using up all the available space, but they've even gotten so bad that they've ruptured the pipe entirely. Licensed service providers are absolutely necessary for some systems, especially innovative alternative designs, or systems with pump chambers as mentioned. They keep the system working efficiently, well maintained, which helps avoid possible costly repairs later. An O&M contract can cover things such as regular lateral line flushing, routine sludge judging, and pump service. Some systems may require a contract for warranty purposes as well. Boards of health may also require some level of documentation, as failure can become a public health threat. Some systems or jurisdictions may also require licensed installers due to the environmental sensitivity of the area or presence of a grease trap. There also may be field monitoring to collect samples and send them to the lab in accordance with the community bylaw to protect the system and public health. They will help monitor your system, keeping the components working properly, ensuring long operational life of the system. Again, keep in mind the regs of your state or local region whenever you're considering this. It's important to mention what not to flush or put down the drain, whether your system is operated by the homeowner or by a contractor. Do not allow chemicals such as paint thinners, poisons, flushable wipes, cat litter, I shouldn't have to mention, large amounts of fog, which is fats, oil, and grease, large amounts of disinfectants, tampons, or pharmaceuticals such as antibiotics to enter the system. Be careful with batch product waste. For all you hobbyists in the audience, wasting beer, wine, soaps, and other products down the drain when things don't turn out the way you want them to could really cause some big upsets as well. Be mindful. Here's a quick example of what grease can do to the pipes of your system. Grease builds up, it will clog the pipe. It can also harden and become very difficult to clean out. Pipes need to be pitched correctly as well so that the grease can get conveyed to the septic tank and held there with the baffle and sucked out later. If the problem is persistent, you may need to add a clean out or even replace the pipes entirely. A note on drain opener: do not use it habitually. Household drain cleaner is typically made from sodium hypochlorite, which is basically bleach, and sodium hydroxide, lye, sodium chloride, sodium nitrate, and aluminum as well. Once poured down the drain, these chemicals react, decomposing the organic matter that is causing the blockage. as the chemicals mix together to create the heat, speeding up the decomposition process. Furthermore, when mixing with grease and water, the chemicals drain opener create a soap and bubbles that's loosening the clog. This is fine to use when needed, minimally, but continued use of these products are not good for the microbial life of your septic tank. You also want to avoid the use of garbage disposals. They can overload your system with solids, and they can go untreated and really short circuit the system. Another useful hint, space out your heavy water usage, such as showers and laundry. I think I mentioned before, that's really important as well. And again, avoid parking on the drain field, piling snow, or diverting surface water to that area. Irrigation. Again, avoid rooting plants around your drain field as well. Leaky faucets or toilets should be fixed quickly. One toilet can leak 200 gallons per day. That's 6,000 gallons a month. If you have a lot of people in the home and you add a leak on top of it, this can really tax your septic system. It's a recipe for disaster. We also find that to be the case in areas where the residence is served by public water. I'm not sure that Sherborn is, but we tend to find that where public water is available, the systems fail more readily. The leaks just don't get found as often, or especially where places are not metered and they don't have to charge for that leak. If it's a flat rate, they may not worry about the leak. Venting. The system requires venting, and these vents are all connected because of the difference in elevation. Air will flow out of the elevated stack, and because of the biological process that's creating some heat, the heat will rise and will flow the opposite direction of gravity up the line and out the rooftop stack. Make sure this vent has a screen. Make sure the vent isn't blocked. Critters can get in there and get stuck or build nests. A durable screen that lets the air pass through with small enough space so the animals can get in is really important. Make sure it's constructed of something like plastic or stainless steel. It's not going to corrode and break down. Sewer pipe materials. It's important to know what these systems are made out of. We typically see PVC and ABS pipe. It's popular for its lightweight, low cost, but can break if installed incorrectly or driven on top of, for example. Cast iron is very strong, but it's expensive and heavy. Orangeburg is composed of fibrous wood, pulp layers wrapped with tar. Generally don't see it anymore. It is prone to blistering and ultimate failure since it's not installed anymore. If you find it, it is old and you'll want to replace it or stay away from it entirely because if you get near it, it will break. Much like clay. Clay is some of the oldest pipe material out there. It's still in use. It can be quite good as it is resistant to corrosion, but it is porous and they do crack easily, and it is also a magnet for tree roots as well. Failing septic systems. When wastewater is unable to seep into the groundwater, we can observe signs of a failing septic system, which includes sluggish drains or odors, backups into the house, squishy, patchy lawn, suspiciously lush grass. The picture here really illustrates that pattern quite well. You may have a tank full of solids and overwhelming the drain field or high groundwater. There may also be leaking tanks, broken pipes, tree roots, or other general damage present as well. You'll see the little "or is it" comment, but I'm getting to that. Signs your septic tank is full. You may be overdue for pumping. There could be standing water around the tank. You may experience unpleasant odors or gurgling pipes, slow drains, suspiciously lush lawn, algal blooms in a nearby pond that never used to have them, high nitrate in nearby water wells, backed up sewer lines are all indications that your tank could be full. But as I said, or is it? It is worth noting that clogged drains or slow toilets can be caused by the plumbing in your house as well, or the vents that may not be working properly. So make sure you check those areas prior to doing any sort of major in-depth inspection of your system, unless something is blatantly obvious like the pictures we've shown here today. It's worth mentioning the regs here. Each state operates and regulates these systems differently. One example here from the state of Massachusetts is Title V Inspection Code. So what is Title V? It refers to the section of Massachusetts State Environmental Code that describes acceptable operating parameters for commercial septic systems. As of March 31st, 1995, code governing septic systems, commonly referred to as Title V regulations, requires inspections of septic systems and cesspools prior to a home being sold or enlarged. In most instances, systems that fail inspection must be repaired within 2 years. Title V inspection involves checking a septic system against these codes to ensure that the property is in compliance. If you're thinking of replacing your individual system with a cluster, this may need to be considered. You may need to think about, you may be failing based upon your inspection at your own house or asking neighbors. There others in the area are having the same problem. It's a good place to start, having that existing system inspection, whether it's passing or failing. After that, you may need to hire an engineer or a contractor to build this new system. You may need to hire an attorney to establish a legal entity or purchase land. You need to post meetings and collect fees from those connected to the new system and have a set of bylaws to protect it as well. All things worth considering. And lastly, the EPA's website has a link that is quite cool, actually, for an EPA website. The graphic shows septic systems and how they work. It is totally interactive and has the sounds of the toilet. You can turn your volume up and actually hear these things. Sink, the shower, everything, right on down through the septic tank and the leach field. Plumbing shows the water flowing. So it's really quite a good resource, and it's kind of fun to watch with your kids too. And here's another resource EPA has for Septic Smart Week each year. Broad range of information available on its website, including materials and videos, as you can see. And I think now we might be prepared for questions, if any have been dropped into the chat box.
Yeah, we only have one question, but I also Mark Oram from Board of Health wanted to discuss the local codes, if you will, based on the construction stuff that you just went over, Andrew. So I don't know what you want to do first.
Yeah, let's have Mark first, because that might spur some more questions.
Sure. And
Sure, because we only have one question actually now anyway, so feel free to send some more over.
Can you hear me okay?
We can, Mark. Thank you.
Excellent. So if I can, thank you for all these presentations. A couple points and a couple just observations on the slides. First of all, Sherborn is all private wells, so we don't have to worry about municipal water coming in for any deterioration of pipes and so forth. But it's more important that the general public that's attending knows that we take it very serious, the protection of the private wells. And we actually have our own local regulations that require additional distance than what the state requires. So I just wanted to point that out. We, in our local regulations, do not allow anything but PVC pipe, heavy-duty PVC pipe. The first 10 feet out is usually up to the plumbing inspector. Sometimes it is cast iron. The other thing, too, is that I noticed on one slide you noted some of the EPA documents. They're really good documents, but one document that we set up was the document to allow people that are replacing their septic systems to basically have a little guideline. So all this is on our website, and that website can be found at sherbornma.org. So feel free to go to that site, and that would be helpful. And 1 second, please. Okay, and then the other thing too is on some of the slides, I just wanted to mention, let's see, the septic tank, we require a two-compartment tank is a very advantageous type of tank because it allows settlement of the solids 2 times, not just once. So that's a requirement. Another important point I wanted to note is if people have cesspools, they do need to replace that. If they conducted Title V inspection and it's found to have a cesspool, then they're required to be replaced in 1 year because cesspools are just not a good functioning system. There was no consideration for the environment when they were basically putting cesspools in prior years. So it's one of those things that we're very concerned about. And again, would have to be replaced in a year if you're selling a house and it's been disclosed that you have a cesspool. Pump chambers, they have dual alternating pumps because of the fact that indeed, if you're doing a septic system replacement, we want to make sure that if one pump fails, another pump will actually be available in case one pump does fail. Distribution boxes, the board requires that you have a stronger distribution box. Unfortunately, and I think some of the general public may know this that are listening in, we see a lot of distribution box replacements, and the reason for it is the construction of them wasn't with the best concrete, and they're not based on the loading. We require what they call a H20 loading tank, a distribution box, I'm sorry. We don't allow any beds or fields, so I did want to point that out as well. And we do require just trenches or pits and no more than 2 feet deep. But we don't allow any leaching beds or leaching fields because they basically have that anaerobic slime that was mentioned earlier that builds up a lot faster because it's always wetted below a leaching field or leaching bed. We don't allow, I know one of your slides showed a system going into an A layer. In the state, they do not allow septic systems to go into the A layer unless they have been approved as an innovative alternative type system. So just so that you're aware of that. The mound systems you showed, if you're replacing a system, most engineers are trying to use innovative alternative technology so those mounds won't be as large as shown on these slides. But we have had those in place prior to the innovative alternative technologies being approved by the state of Massachusetts. If you're building a new house and you need to put it on a new lot or new property area, you need to basically be sure there's no groundwater within the first 5 feet of materials. So it pretty much eliminates a very high mound, and it basically allows the naturally occurring soil to be used more than sewer gravel, because sewer gravel unfortunately has to be porous enough so it doesn't compact, but it doesn't treat the system as the effluent as well as the it doesn't treat the effluent as well if it's got sewer gravel below it. So that's why we have that regulation. And again, we guide people through this. I've mentioned innovative alternative technologies. There are some that do require secondary treatment units before them. And yes, in operation and maintenance, they do have specific requirements to check the system sometimes 4 times a year, sometimes once a year, sometimes twice a year. We recommend if you have a conventional system that we require that you inspect it once a year and if needed, pump it. And again, if there's ever, I got a couple more things, nothing major. It's just that if there's ever questions, we have a nice setup area in our website, on our Board of Health website. As I mentioned, it's sherbornma.org. Just go to the Board of Health section. You'll see lots of guides and lots of information to help you along if you have questions. And just as important, you're always welcome to call our office. We have knowledgeable staff in the office, as well as I can answer questions if they can't. And that number is 508-651-7852. Again, it's 508-651-7852. We're here to help because this can be very complicated. As even just from the overview of what you presented, and I know you try to bring it down to layman's perspective, but it gets complicated at times. So I know my vice chairperson also wanted to speak. I believe Daryl Beardsley may be I know she's in the audience, so you may want to, if you're ready for her, but that's what I have to offer. And if there's any questions, I'll be here to help out as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I have unmuted Daryl.
Okay, yes, hi. So I want to follow up on a couple of things that Mark has mentioned, a few additional details and things that people might be worried about, such as, might I have a tight tank at my house? And just so people know, tight tanks, we really try to avoid them because they are complicated to use, because as mentioned, they need to be pumped out regularly because it means all the wastewater from your home is going into a tank. Then you have to get a tanker truck to come pick it up and bring it to a wastewater treatment plant. Mark, I can't think of any homes that we have with the tight tank, but there are for certain businesses that might be generating a wastewater with a harmful chemical in it, toxic chemical.
Yeah,
The state would require tight tanks for that. The only
that's
one
correct.
I can think of offhand in town was the former spa where there was hair dyeing and straightening and things that were using harsh chemicals.
That
And
that is.
so
Oh, go
while
ahead.
their bathrooms might not have been diverted to that tight tank, certainly the sinks where those kinds of procedures were being performed and those chemicals used would go out to a tight tank so that they didn't have to pump everything from the site to somewhere else. So, Mark, are there any others
That
where
is
we?
correct, except for one household that the perk rate was very, very high.
Uh,
I'm hoping someday they'll consider looking at some of the IA tech, innovative alternative technology to convert that to a conventional, well, not conventional, but an innovative alternative system so they can allow some of the leachate to leave the tank. But there's only one that I know of at this point.
okay. And then something else that was mentioned was about alarms when you have a pump system. Sometimes that'll happen if your house is at a lower elevation than where your leaching field is, or even your septic tank, and there might have to be pumps to move the water, and it's not a gravity fed system. The good news on that is that in the design of those systems, there are requirements for those alarms. So all that's installed when your system is installed. So it's not something you have to think of to add on later. It'll just be part of your system and you'll see it. Usually in your basement, it'll be a box and it'll have a light on it and it'll make a sound if there's some problem with the pumps. Um, so let me just see what other things. Mark, if you could comment on the Title V inspection, I guess what I was thinking along the lines of it's not why it's not 100% guarantee of a system being in perfect condition.
And that's correct. The main item that they check on that list is the status of the leaching field, and they can tell that from the distribution box that distributes the effluent into the leaching trenches. We do have some beds out there, as I say, we don't allow them any longer, but if they see the effluent, the liquid that's coming out of the septic tank into the distribution box, then that effluent is above the outlets, above the inlets of the outlet pipes, then that's an automatic failure. There's other reasons for failures as well, as was shown in some of the slides with, you can sometimes see it from the grass growth being green in some areas and not others, or roots growing into pipes. But the main item in the Title V inspection is the distribution box check. And sometimes, unfortunately, if you're not maintaining your system on a needed basis, usually it's every 1 to 3 years, those solids will start getting into the distribution box and into the field and fail the septic system, unfortunately. And then it does need to be replaced. Is that what you were
Okay.
looking for, Darryl?
Yes, that's just so people know it's a very helpful check, but again, without doing things like putting cameras through the lines in the leaching field and doing kind of extra opening of tanks and inspecting them, it's hard to know everything about your system, but it's certainly a big step in the right direction. And then the other big area I wanted to address has to do with how we treat our septic systems. And the reason I bring this up is septic systems were designed to handle mostly the non-toxic waste materials, biological waste materials, what we excrete, uh, residuals of food products and things like that. They were not designed to handle paint, um, volatile organic chemicals, mineral spirits, uh, plastics, PFAS, pharmaceuticals. Those kinds of things are not well treated. Not only not well treated, but they can also disrupt the performance of the bacteria that was mentioned for denitrifying and that kind of thing. So that's a problem because you're not going to get that kind of treatment that you're hoping for. If even bleach, to me, the main problem is not the pH, but the reason bleach is such a good disinfectant is because it's very toxic. So it kills things. And I've seen I work more with industrial commercial facilities on wastewater management. And bleach, glycols, any kind of antifreezes that go in can wipe out the bacteria population, and then you're not getting any denitrification, and you're not getting proper treatment by beneficial bacteria to address what's the fecal matter. So what we put down our systems is very important if you want them to work well. And that could mean using alternative cleaning agents and the like. And that's important, I think, to remember because it does affect the long-term performance and groundwater quality issues that we have in town. Also, synthetic chemicals, it's just bacteria doesn't necessarily work on that. And again, pharmaceuticals can fall into that. Also, the term organics was used, and it does refer to things that contain carbon, but not all organic material can be broken down by biological processes because we've learned how to do things such as take carbon, link it together with other molecules. In the case of linking it with fluorine, and polymerizing that, you get PFAS. And I know a lot of people in Sherborn certainly have been hearing about the PFAS issue, and that is called a forever chemical. It does not get broken down or cleaned up by passing through our septic systems. And we don't yet know what the impact is on the performance of septic systems. I did want to mention that high nitrogen is not only a problem for the blue baby syndrome, but for the elderly or for people who otherwise have health issues, it can be a problem. And also the kinds of health impacts that it has are things that you wouldn't say, oh, gee, this is because of exposure to nitrogen. The symptoms can be similar to respiratory troubles or heart disease. So it's not easy. It's not an easy thing to identify. And unfortunately, the best thing to do with nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus would be to put them where they're needed, which is on plants. But the reason we put our sewage underground here is because the goal was to avoid human contact with the wastewater. So spreading it on the land where actually those things would be treated by vegetation, you're not getting that when we're putting it underground. So it's a very complex topic, but one we certainly spend a lot of time on at the Board of Health, trying to get systems that are performing well and what have you. Let's see.
Darrell, if I can interject, I thought of one
Yep,
thing
go
as you're
ahead.
talking about the sewage. The one, I guess we call it the golden rule for us is if you have a garbage disposal or grinder, take it out. You really shouldn't be putting garbage down the drain because it's undigested waste, which increases the strength of the waste, and it's harder for it to break down. So I forgot to mention that. It might have been mentioned in the presentation. I might have missed it, but we do not recommend, or we recommend if you have a garbage grinder to take it out of your plumbing.
So, okay, so that's, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about the higher level cycling and processing of materials that go through septic systems and what impacts can be on them. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol and Mark. I believe we have a couple of questions.
Yep, questions. We got here.
There are some in the chat. Are you going to address those, Andrew and
Yep, I'm
Rebecca?
pulling them up right now. The first one that one came in during the presentation. Why does the drain line have to be level and not pitched? Won't the water coagulate?
Yeah, I think in that case I might have misspoken. It needs to be pitched, but the main point there is that there's no dips or valleys in the pipe, so that it's consistent throughout. You want it pitched so that the flow is consistent. So it may not have been perfectly level from the house to the drain field, for example, but level is in terms of appropriate pitch being carried all the way through smoothly.
In the drain field, also, you don't want to pitch too much. The
Right.
water could just take off and go right by those orifices, and then the water would be deposited at the end. You kind of want it to sort slowly drain through that pipe. The Title V inspection, Title V regulation book says 0.05 feet per foot pitch. So almost
I
level.
I appreciate your engineering expertise on that, Rebecca. I was gonna say it, but I didn't want to put myself on a limb, so I appreciate that factoid. Thank you.
Yeah. And the next question looks like it's going to be going to the Board of Health. Is the town of Sherborn monitoring compliance of the annual septic tank inspection mentioned by Mark? Who conducts this annual inspection? How does a homeowner set this up?
Okay, and if I can add to that, it's not required, it's recommended. When you put a new septic system in, we put a poster on an as-built in the house stating that the system shall be inspected once a year and, if needed, pumped. But there is no follow-through on that. We don't have a program, and I don't think any city or town in the state has a program right now that monitors it, but it wouldn't be a bad idea, but it requires quite a bit of resources.
Right, for us to check on. So you can, depending on your setup, and I'd caution anyone who's going to be opening up the access ports to their tanks to be very careful, certainly about falling into the tanks. And also the covers can be very heavy and difficult to move, so you can be injured that way too. Plus
Yeah, we don't
determining, excuse me?
No, I was just going to say we don't recommend anyone but a licensed professional do the inspection of the septic
Yes,
system.
yes, that would be the easiest, because the next point is, once you open it, unless you have that device also that was showed, it's often called a Kalawasa tube to put into the tank so you can see the ratio of the liquid to the solids on the top and bottom. That is very difficult to determine without some sort of instrumentation or tool. So it would be good to inspect. You might also see over time with inspections, because we don't require pumping every year. The pumping is driven by what the conditions are. But depending on what kind of wastewater you're generating, the volumes, the content, and as I alluded to earlier, what other chemicals might be getting in there or materials that could disrupt the processes that are breaking down the waste materials that are going there. The need for pumping could vary widely from household to household. So you might establish a pattern over time that'll make it easier to predict when you might want to inspect and pump. And I'll also mention that I knew someone at the Massachusetts Water Resources Authority who was in charge of all the inspectors for systems. And he did a test at his home where he did reduce the use of toxic household cleaners and other chemicals that were entering his septic system. And he noticed a huge change in the accumulation of solids. And that change was that solids did not accumulate rapidly in his tank after he made the change, because the materials were able to break down better and liquefy better and be handled by the septic system. If that makes it more compelling for anybody to try that out too.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. And the next question looks like it's going back to the Board of Health too. How many septic system failures were reported in last year in town?
That's a good question. I don't have that data with me, but we see an average of about 25 repairs a year. And it depends too on the real estate market because most people won't have a Title V inspection unless they're planning to sell their house. So if the real estate market's very hot, which it was the past couple of years, we'll see more repairs being completed. But I'm just giving you the averages at this time. We do have that data available if that person wants to call the office. We can let them know how many failures there were and how many. It's based on the repairs. If they have a failure, they do have to repair the system. So we can get that data if they need it. They can call our office.
Okay, great. Next question. What about a cleaning agent like Dawn dishwashing soap? Is that a problem for the bacteria?
Take that. It's not a problem if it's normal use, but what's normal, right? So I guess it depends if you have 2 people in your home versus you have 12. But generally, if you're using a normal amount of dish soap for a normal amount of dishes in your household, it shouldn't be a problem. If you know that you're using a lot of soap because you have a lot of people, or you're just one of those people that likes to squirt a bunch out, you always have the option of switching over to a more eco-friendly soap if you feel like you use a lot. But generally, it shouldn't be a problem.
That's right, Rebecca. And if you mentioned industrial type situations before, you'll see anywhere there's a lot of suds being made, like a laundromat, something like that. You'll see something similar to a grease trap to give you a buffering zone between yourself and the septic tank. So absolutely fine for normal usage. But as I mentioned before as well, ditching them down the drain because they've gone bad or expired, or you're trying to attempt to make your own, that's also something you want to certainly avoid. Oh, I just saw a question coming in, Jim, about toilet paper, septic system friendly. I'll take that real quick. There are new, I believe it's Cottonelle, perhaps. There's a few out there that are supposedly flush safe and do break down and are proven to do that. There are others that are not, and the labeling is getting better out there.
Andrew, I
They're called
think you're thinking flushable wipes, and this was toilet paper. Just want to
Yeah,
clarify
I
before we
don't
get too
know.
far.
Any toilet paper is fine if it's toilet paper, but I'm not sure that they're necessarily because toilet paper is one thing, wipes are another. But if it's toilet paper and it's in the toilet paper aisle and it's a big roll, then you're fine. But if it's in a plastic package with a dispensing mechanism, typically that's a red flag and you'll want to avoid it. Frankly, I would avoid them at all costs. But if you are going to use them, make sure it is a flushable kind. And like I said, the packaging is getting better. But again, the problem there with those is if that they don't break down, they will just simply sit in the tank or wherever they reside and cause major problems, clogging the tank, clogging your pipes. If they get through all of that, they'll clog your leach field. Just very detrimental. They'll clog your pumps. They're probably the worst for that. So the wipes, if that's what you're referring to, are certainly something to be avoided. But if it's just regular old toilet paper, that's fine. There are some that have lotions or whatever out there. I don't think they're going to be any problem. Sorry, Rebecca. I may have been off track on that.
That's fine. Nope, I agree.
But I think it's worth going over one more time just in case
Yeah.
there was any misinformation there.
Yeah.
Sorry,
And a
Jim.
little
I
addition
just
on the
jumped right in.
I was gonna say a little addition on the flushable wipes is actually a bill in the Massachusetts legislation right now going through to actually make those have to be labeled appropriately that they're not flushable, if you will, because there's so many issues caused by these clogging up, a lot of municipal wastewater systems, but same thing in an on-site wastewater system too. I mean, they're just not going to break down like normal toilet paper, and everything else we normally would flush down does, if you will. So.
Thanks for that comment, Jim. Some laws can really make an impact, and I think that would be one of them for sure.
And the one last question I have is: any suggestions for companies, people to contact for inspections and or pumping? We being funded by federal and state funding cannot give out, make recommendations on who to use and who not to use. So I'll throw that to the Board of Health if they give
Sure.
any list
And
of
we're the, yeah,
contractors.
and that's fine. And we're in the same category. We're a local agency, so we don't recommend, but we tell people, look through the yellow pages, and I think that's outdated. So go on the web and check for some of the vendors. We have to license the septic haulers. Excuse me. So you can call for that list, and they're the licensed septic haulers, and we'd be glad to share that with whoever has a request for it.
And certain companies also have only certain contractors that they will work with as well, so that's also worth mentioning.
It doesn't take too many phone calls to find a friend or a neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody who's recently had inspections or pumping done. Especially if a house was recently sold, they'll have to have an inspection. So
it may come as a surprise to you that there aren't a ton of companies that like to do this. So yeah, not so hard to find.
And if you're looking for a Title V inspector, those companies and persons are licensed by the state, and you could always look under the state website for that. And we can guide you if you need to find that as well.
All right, well, that's all the questions I see.
Okay, great.
Right.
We're going to launch our post-test. It's very quick. It's the same questions you all answered in the beginning. Andrew, are you doing that, or would you like me to?
I will launch the post-test, Rebecca.
Does someone have?
Yes, could I make just one more comment for people? So in your presentation, you had mentioned about pathogens being present in wastewater. And I want to point out two things about Sherborn regulations that that are a bit more stringent than the state Title V, because Title V is a minimum that applies to towns that have, say, water supplied by the Quabbin Reservoir. So there may be septic systems, but they're not discharging into the ground where the residents are also pulling their drinking water from. So we have a few extra requirements, and two of those address not only pathogens, but pathogens are important to it. One is that instead of a 4-foot separation from the bottom of your leaching field to the top of the groundwater, is not just 4 feet, it's a state minimum. We have 5 feet, which is quite common for places that have the kind of closed cycle that we do with septic and well water, private wells on the same property. So that 5 feet gives a little bit more filtering by the soil, but it's a dry soil because something that is important to killing off viruses and bacteria is a drying out period. And there have been a lot of studies done on Cape Cod about that because that's something that they've had to track carefully. And that extra foot before you hit groundwater is important. Provides, again, more time for drying because once bacteria and viruses, if they stay wet in the ground, so if they hit groundwater too soon, they will continue to live for a long time. And that's what Cape Cod has been seeing in their very sandy soils and their high water levels. And then related to that is our perk rate. So, and I won't go into exactly what that is, but the slower the perk rate, the longer it takes for water to move through the soil, means that the soil can stay wetter longer. So think about the difference. Sand has a very fast perk rate, right? The water flows through and then the sand is drying out. But if you have a clay soil, the rainwater will move very slowly through it, so it stays wet longer. So it also provides an environment where those viruses can live if the soil stays damp. So we don't allow slow perk rates, meaning systems in very clay type soil. So just in case people are wondering what happens with those pathogens.
Thank you,
Okay,
Derek.
now I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
No, thank you very much. That's really important and wealth of knowledge. And what you're talking about on the Cape is absolutely important and on the cutting edge for sure.
Okay, so that concludes our training here, but don't go yet. If you can just give us like 2 or 3 more minutes of your time, complete the post test. Andrew, if you can go ahead and launch that.
I'm launching now.
After you're done with the post test, exit the training. After you exit the training, a evaluation will pop up. And if you don't get to it tonight, that's okay. It'll be emailed to you tomorrow, but we'd really love your feedback. Want to know how we did? If you have any other questions. Yeah.
And
Constructive criticism.
while people are studying the post test, and I hope everybody gets 100, I want to thank our speakers again from RCAP, Rebecca, Andrew, and Jim. I really appreciate you providing this event tonight, as we did the event on our wells a year ago. And I also want to thank both Daryl and Mark from the Board of Health contributing.
Yes, thank you. You're welcome. We're happy to
Welcome.
be here, always. And it's nice to have the Board of Health on too, just to give us their view. Because like
No,
you
and
said,
it's nice for us as well.
Good, good. And
To have you presenting here today, and all we had to do was add a few specifics. So
yep.
We appreciate that because we don't necessarily have all the specifics at every locality at hand, and it's always better to have it coming from yourselves anyway, because you're the ones that deal with it at the local level. So we appreciate that.
And thank you as well.
And for anyone listening, we do welcome questions anytime. Just call the office if you have a concern, and we're happy to help you out.
Yeah, I'd like to pass that number
topic
on to people in the website as well. While people are taking the test and we're here, I've navigated to sherbornma.org. How do I get to where you said there was a place for questions? Can you navigate me to there?
There are a few ways. There's a department tab, and you can find the Board of Health under that. And there's, I'm forgetting the name. There's a number of ways that you can get to the Board of Health portion. But department is one.
I have Board of Health. Was there a specific place for septic system information?
Under regulations. There's I believe that's on the left side in the bar. There is you can get a copy of our regulations there, all of the regulations that we have, which includes things like tobacco and body art and water and other things.
No shortage of topics you all cover. I can see that.
So it may be easiest for someone to call us about what they're specifically looking for, and then we can point you right to it.
So I will put the phone number 508-651-7852 into the follow-up email. That way everyone will have it.
Perfect. And then the email is easy. It's health@sherbornma.org.
That's a different. Okay, so we have the Groundwater Protection Committee. Is that a different? Which would you rather people?
Yes, that's a different group.
Two different groups.
Which one would you rather people contact if they have questions about their septic system?
Well, for the septic, you'd want the Board of Health.
For general water, groundwater quality issues, I think. Tom, you okay with your group?
I'm fine. And Rebecca, with our follow-up from the Groundwater Protection Committee from this event, we'll take the questions and answers and your slides and everything and bundle them together, and we'll leave contact information for both the Board of Health and the
Okay,
Groundwater
I'll
Protection
let you
Committee.
do that. That way it'll be more clear because I'm a little
Yeah,
bit fussy about it.
that's what
So,
we did.
okay.
That's what we did with the well presentation. So how we
Hey, Drew.
doing on the test?
I think we're fully submitted. A lot of people have been shuffling out, so I could go
I'm
ahead and
gonna
end the test.
let's wait. Stop the recording first.
You want me to stop the recording first before I end the test? Okay.